Welcome to this Sabbath afternoon study. We begin a new series, number 47, entitled Precise Redemption. We all understand the word redemption. However, the title includes a second word, precise. Defining that adjective greatly helps to frame our series theme. According to Webster, it means exactly or sharply defined or stated. Ergo, our doctrine of redemption, each step along the way, becomes more sharply refined with what Paul articulated as strong meat. To illustrate, we are told in Isaiah 49 the following, verse 13, "Sing, O heaven, and be joyful, O earth." Verse 14, "But Zion said, the Lord hath forsaken me, and my Lord hath forgotten me." Isaiah 49, verses 13 and 14. And I thank you for those that are trying to follow with the scriptures, for accepting the truncation of many of the scriptures that I cite. The Lord just promised you, as a prophecy that's being fulfilled, that there'll be multiple repetitions, and it'll be from here a little, there a little, here a little, and there a little. That's the way the word of the Lord is described to come to us. We, the mustard seed Advent adherents, as proven by many studies, are Zion. But seemeth it not peculiar to you that heaven and earth are told to sing? Meanwhile, we ourselves cannot so sing. Obviously, we have become so exasperated or frustrated so as to feel forsaken. Our emotions are therefore out of sync with the Lord's expectations. This series shall harmonize our yearning for redemption by more precisely defining it. Hence, this Sabbath afternoon, October the 23rd, 2021, we enter into the first study of the series, numbered 47.1. It is entitled Full Wheat Floor. Before saying more on it, let us first uncover the need for the term wheat. It is not just for us, but for heaven's joy as well. The wheat is shown in Malachi chapter 3, verse 6 through 10 and verse 16, is for the Lord's house. Verse 6 says, "For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore ye sons of Jacob are not consumed." We have an important moniker right there. This text is directed to the sons of Jacob. Continuing with verse 7. "Even from the days of your fathers ye are gone away from mine ordinances, and have not kept them. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, saith the Lord of hosts. But ye say, wherein shall we return? Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithe and offerings. Ye are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation." Verse 10, "Bring ye all the tithe into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house." Why? Notice the underline. The tithe must come to the storehouse so that the Lord may have meat in his house. "Bring ye all the tithe into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it. Verse 16. Then they that feared the Lord spake often one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard it. And a book of remembrance was written before him for them that fear the Lord and that thought upon his name. Malachi chapter 3, verse 6 through 10, and verse 16. Christ is the Lord. Proof is his own confession, for he says, quote, "For I am the Lord," close quote. But to affirm his prophetic claim, he, Christ, the Lord, cites another personality, whom he calls by a different proper compound name, the name, the Lord of hosts, or Jesus. Understanding that Christ was the dove that rested upon Jesus for 42 months and spoke through him clandestinely, we can appreciate this distinction of his name all the more. The host over whom Jesus presides is the Gentile nations. Both Jesus and Christ affirm that since their inception into the gospel call, or from the days of their fathers, they have ignored the Lord's Old Testament ordinances. Thus we can reread with full knowledge. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, saith the Lord of hosts. Jesus is used here as a respected reference source to affirm Christ's day of return and to show that the entirety of all Gentile believers at the end of their appointed time are accused of forsaking Christ's Old Testament ordinances. And worse, Laodicea, their ordained temple mount, has absorbed all the tithe and offerings. And this crime has denied the supply of meat for a different Christian diaspora, Christ's own house. This, Christ, with Jesus' affirmation, calls robbery. A sequence must be noted. First, the charge of robbery. Then comes a reformation of the men of honor in Adventism, those few who relent and give heed to the Bible studies that help them define the Lord's identity, his name. Because of this, Christ receives the meat for his house. And this participation blesses those newly reformed Adventists and absolves them from the curse of Adventist robbery. Their blessing, we shall see, is a supply of a full wheat floor. The intent is that the wheat, being transformed into bread, feeds the Enochians. This is a short synopsis of that which we have proven over our years of study. So shall the Enochians shortly be able to return home to earth to teach and judge, as shown in the book of Jude. Verse 14. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all and to convince, to what? To convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Jude, verses 14 and 15. So it becomes plain to see this wheat gives bread not merely for Jesus' earthbound Gentile house, but also for those who abide within Christ's very own house. Bring ye all the tithe unto the storehouse, a different place, so that there may be meat in mine house. Resultingly, heaven and earth have reason to rejoice, and Zion too, for we have distinguished Christ's identity and thought upon his name. The blessing is poured upon us, and there is not room enough to receive it. Verses 14 through 18. Verse 14, ye have said it is vain to serve God. And what profit is it that we have kept his ordinance, and that we have walked mournfully before the Lord of hosts? Verse 15, and now we call the proud happy. Yea, they that work wickedness are set up. Yea, they that tempt God are even delivered. Then, as we read continuously in verse 16, then they that feared the Lord spake often one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard it, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that fear the Lord, and that thought upon his name. So it didn't say that Christ wrote the book of remembrance. It was written before him. And it was written for the benefit of those who feared Christ, the Lord, and thought upon his name. Verse 17. And they shall be mine. Oh, that's a wonderful promise, isn't it? And they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts. It's nice that Jesus is on board with this promise, and that he is able to assure Christ that the saints who thought upon his name are going to be inherited to him, Christ. And they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels. And I will spare them as a man spareth his own son that serveth him. Verse 18. Then shall ye return and discern between the righteous and the wicked, between him that serveth God and him that serveth him not. Malachi chapter 3, verses 14 through 18. Let me just make a quick comment on that as we examine the fact that our part of our education answers our repine that the wicked are set up. You're not going to discern that that is not exactly the truth. You're going to learn the distinction between those people that serve him and those people that serve him not. In fact, I think now, as I ponder upon it further, this has to include the Enochians as well. But we're talking about the full wheat floor. We cannot appropriately cover this topic unless we turn to Joel chapter 2. Before so turning, let me just state, only Seventh-day Adventists would claim that no benefit has come to them for their historic compliance to Old Testament ordinances, while they, quote, walk mournfully before Jesus, the Lord of hosts, close quote. This is a keen concept that needs to be further expanded upon before we leave Malachi chapter 3. For they, amidst all of Babylon's 7 mountainside minions, are the only ones who have given honor to the Old Testament law. This even more so with Davidian Adventists. A small group among them, the mustard seed Adventists, have distinguished between the Lord and the Lord of hosts, between Christ and Jesus, and have, quote, spake. I like the fact that that word is put in past tense. They spake often one to another, and Christ the Lord hearkened to them. And just to them, he says, then they that feared the Lord spake often one to another, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord, and that thought upon his name. And they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels. Before the book 7, a trumpet luminescence, also known as the book of remembrance, we spake often amongst ourselves for nearly 14 years, and prior even, and we spoke of Christ's name. Ergo, this point must resonate. At the end of this oftentimes interpersonal communion of saints, a new day blossoms. It says, quote, a book of remembrance was written for them. The same book that I have now just fully edited for your next distribution. These, it further states, shall discern between good and evil servants. To elaborate further, we can now examine the need for the wheat. Having thoroughly covered Malachi chapter 3, I point you as promised to Joel chapter 2, verse 23 through 25. We are told again, as we were told, to rejoice in Isaiah 49. Verse 23, we are told, be glad then, ye children of Zion, and rejoice in the Lord your God, for he hath given you the former rain moderately, and he will cause to come down for you the rain, the former rain and the latter rain in the first month. Verse 24. Notice the underline here. And the floors shall be full of wheat, and the fats shall overflow with oil and wine. Again, Joel chapter 2, verses 23 and 24. Why must Zion be commanded to rejoice? Have you ever pondered upon such a theme? Have you ever needed to be told, in fact, to rejoice? Your doctor cures you. Your candidate wins the election. Your favorite football team pulls out a miraculous victory. You pass a major test. You meet the love of your life. The bank forgives your debt. You get the promotion at work, etc. Point is, under these and many other joy-inspiring circumstances, you needn't be told to be happy. Does a full wheat floor do it for you also? Before answering, know that Christ said that, not speaking to everyone, but only to his 11 disciples, they shall receive this tangible joy. I cite to you John chapter 16, reading verses 20 and 22. Verse 20, verily, verily, I say unto you, the world shall rejoice, and ye shall be sorrowful, but your sorrow shall be turned into joy. And ye now therefore have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart shall rejoice, and your joy no man taketh from you. John chapter 16, verses 20 and 22. Joy, real joy, is here promised. Joel 2 leads us into your gladness. It is theoretical in meaning. Before you receive it, you did not precisely, there's that word again, you did not precisely comprehend the day of your redemption. Your consternation is manifest in the difference between wheat and bread. But such still works, for we are a people of faith. We know that just as our sadness came by Christ's promise, and it was real, so shall be our joy. Symbolically, it starts with the very thing that brings the wheat harvest, the latter rain. You have to be in an agricultural society to appreciate this. But it looks as if the wheat is going to die on the field, and you need the latter rain to bring it to full maturity. When the latter rain comes, you rejoice. Symbolically, it starts with the very thing that brings the wheat harvest, the latter rain. The mustard seed's teachings these past 14 years, and even before. It has caused our floor to be full, not of bread, but of wheat. This gives to us the keen metaphor. Unless devastated by the locust and the cankerworm, when you have an abundance of the summer wheat, you can even look at the fields to have theoretical joy, even though the real joy comes by the bread into which it shall be transformed. Wheat, be it still growing or on the threshing floor, is like our joy that we have today. And we are encouraged to be happy because we anticipate the day of its consumption. We spent much time in past studies speaking of the corn, the wine, and the fats, or the oils. We can't do too much digression onto those topics with this study. But more needs to be said from Joel 2, verses 19 and 24. Verse 19, yea, the Lord will answer and say unto his people, behold, I will send you corn and wine and oil, and ye shall be satisfied therewith. Pausing, how do you suppose the Lord is going to say it? He promised the house of Israel that he would never speak to them directly. Thus, he's going to say it through an inspired prophet, like unto Moses, that is going to allow him to finish the work. Yea, the Lord will answer and say unto his people, behold, I will send you corn and wine and oil, and ye shall be satisfied therewith. And I will no more make you a reproach among the heathen. Verse 24. And the floor shall be full of wheat, and the vats shall overflow with wine and oil. Need I remind you, this was Christ's promise to Jacob. Let me recite that to you again. Genesis chapter 27, verses 26 and 28. And his father Isaac said unto him, verse 28, God give thee of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my Father's house in peace. Then shall the Lord be my God. Chapter 28, verses 20 and 21. Jacob's vow was not just for wheat, but for transformed wheat, for bread. When it comes, Christ will be his God. It is therefore a matter of incontrovertible fact that this specific Joel 2 promise, the Lord will answer and say unto his people, I will send you corn and wine and oil, and ye shall be satisfied therewith, and I will no more make you a reproach among the heathen, pertains only to the disciples, a select collection of people, Zion, those who now feel forsaken and who feel this way because they cannot sink their teeth into the bread. Take care to note that with the miracle that fed the throngs, Jesus, and when I say Jesus, I'm referring to Christ speaking through Jesus, Jesus called that very miracle our bread. He wasn't making reference to the loaves and the fish. It, the very blessing of those foods, prefigured the day of our redemption. It, the miracles, are to become our real joy. In fact, he reprehended those who sought him and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me not because ye saw the miracles. In other words, if they sought him because they saw the miracles, that would have been a-okay. There was something wrong for them seeking after the Lord simply because they were filled with the temporal bread, that which did not come down from heaven. Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. Verse 27, labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you. For him hath God the Father sealed. John chapter 6, verses 26 and 27. Such, be it ever so clear, is our satisfaction, our joy, that which causes us to no longer feel forsaken in Christ. Paul, speaking of this phenomenal day, said, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtain a good report. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. The elders of all 12 tribes of Israel, 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, obtained the good report because they hoped by faith for the reality of the kingdom. Ergo, we must unravel the unsavory conclusion that the hour before our joy is a time when we, the elders, can only rely on wheat, not the loaves. That is what we must seek after. It is our good report, our theory of redemption. It is thus a time of hope and some doubt and some consternation, a time when our faith, the joy in the substance hoped for, but not yet seen, it is the joy in the prospective miracles that are now required. It is a time when we are utterly disdained in the church by their unfounded, unfair, and unreasonable reproach for Jacob. So as admonished, we want not just the wheat, but the miracles to come with our transformed wheat, our bread. We want Jacob's empowerment. But in continuance of this analysis, I must ask the sobering question. Can we ignore any of the words of this promise that says, the floor shall be full of wheat? It could have said the floor will have some wheat. It could have said the floor will be ready for the wheat to come. But we need to vest our hope in the exactitude of the promise. Be it not mistaken, wheat in this context is not a reference to converts. Yesterday, this we presumed. Earlier on in my work, people were wanting to know, well, how many people follow the mustard seed? That was their false concept of wheat. Joel 2 proves that it is a reference to our doctrines. And let us stitch home this point very carefully. Doctrines, speaking of which, I point you to another doctrine that needs to be baked with leaven and then rise for our consumption. The wheat has now today been harvested and placed on the floor. Now it must be served as bread. Thus, as the fully edited version of 7 trumpet luminescence is about to be redistributed only amongst the disciples indeed, not by a major broadcast, all must know that today the document is fully finalized. Some have correctly noted their detection of repetitive themes in recent studies. This is because much material, if not all, has been cited to you in our studies prior, and new meaning has come from familiar text. Why is this observation relevant? Because we are now told that the floor is full, and you cannot add more wheat to a full floor. Finally, the wheat must be transformed into something into which we mustard seed Adventists can sink our teeth, that it may be fully digested as bread baked with leaven. This new day was always scheduled to come, the day when no more wheat is added to the full floor. The mustard seed will always serve bread, but it shall come from the wheat that has now been harvested. This is our reason to rejoice. We must carefully examine the order of events now from Joel 2 so that we can put our arms around this theme more firmly. First, let me cite to you the full wheat floor. Then let me cite to you what is referred to as locust, cankerworm, palmer worm, caterpillar, devastation, and then restoration. Then 3, the satisfactory meal. Gone back again to Joel chapter 2, reading a little beforehand, and then examining, after reading verse 19, examining verses 24 through 28. Verse 19 first. Yea, the Lord will answer and say unto his people, behold, I will send you corn and wine and oil, and ye shall be satisfied therewith. And I will no more make you a reproach among the heathen. Point of note, who sends it to you? The Lord. And the floor shall be full of wheat, and the fats shall overflow with wine and with oil. and I will restore. This is a theme that we have never put our arms around before. Thankfully, we can grapple with it right now and gain understanding. Verse 25, and I will restore to you the years that the locust hath eaten, and the cankerworm, and the caterpillar, and the palmer worm. I want you to notice the emphasis I'm going to put on this next possessive pronoun. And the palmer worm, my great army, which I sent among you. Verse 26. And ye shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, that have dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never be ashamed. Verse 27. And ye shall know that I am in the midst of Israel. How does he get to be in the midst of Israel? As promised, he hides upon the prophet like unto Moses. And you're not going to know this until it's revealed as you sink your teeth into the meat, into the bread. Verse 27, and ye shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and none else. And my people shall never be ashamed. You won't have to go amongst the Gentiles and apologize because you're a Davidian Adventist, a mustard seed Adventist, that you believe in all the nuances thereby taught. No, yeah, that's right. I've sunk my teeth in the Wonder Bread. You see? And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see vision. Joel chapter 2, verses 24 through 28. Another addition to the sequential events. After our Joel 2 satisfying feast on bread, we gather another people that we identify as the 144,000. That number could be more carefully defined, but suffice it to say it's the 144,000 now. Heretofore, we thought that they were the wheat. Such could only be by use of a double entendre. They too are real, and they are inspired to work with the now well-fed men, fed from our generous tithe and offerings. Those who, before their return to earth, now abide in the Lord's house. We call them Enochians. They, with the 144,000, will together both minister to teach the world. In other words, they, the 144,000, shall dream dreams and shall prophesy. Instead of calling them our harvest wheat, in this context, they are given another symbolic designation. They are called, quote, our sons and daughters, our young and old men, close quote. We eat the bread so that they may tell our visions, adding a new meaning to the term television. Harmony with this theme and with the parable of Matthew 13 requires addressing in another sitting. Suffice to say for now, the concept of wheat serves as a triple entendre, a literal concept that has not just one application, but another as well. This is why you are served bread for your edification. I bring your mind back to the phrase in Joel chapter 2, and I remind you the nature of our edification. Here a little, there a little. Here a little, there a little. line upon line upon line. I'm reflecting back on verse 25. Reiteration is required. And I will restore to you the years that the locust hath eaten, the cankerworm, and the caterpillar, and the palmer worm, my great army which I sent among you. Verse 26. And ye shall eat in plenty, and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, that hath dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never be ashamed. I hope you find it remarkable. Now, from another perspective, we can see that heaven has, in addition to Zion, to the Enochians, to the 144,000, yet even another army. The noun heaven, I must now emphasize that all may double check any knee-jerk conclusions. This army was not inspired by the devil. The locusts and the worms were not descriptive of the devil's tares that he planted amongst the wheat. Instead, the tares were his false doctrines. Such tares will not meet the promise of this prophecy, I emphasize. They obviously will not be restored by Christ. Heaven's army? Why the emphasis? The church, after all, was sent by heaven to the Gentiles. Accordingly, did they receive sorrow? Just as your sorrow would be in a literal harvesting sense if you saw your blossoming wheat field being consumed by locusts. Yes, indeed. The church was sent by heaven to the Gentiles. Accordingly, did they receive sorrow? Thus, the harm in which the Gentiles, the locusts, so performed was at Christ's very instigation. They were Jesus' army. The Lord will empower Zion. He will cast Babylon's 7 mountains into the sea. And this shall be not just our joy, but let me emphasize and nail home this point as well. It will be his own as well. In so doing, shall we rise to power. This shall be our restoration from our empty harvest of the last 2,000 years, the years that the locust hath eaten. In other words, this restoration of past devastation is, in a nutshell, Jacob's dominion over everything that moveth upon the face of the earth. For in the Gentiles was Jacob's seed made impotent. What is keenly overlooked and very significant, that which has heretofore been underemphasized, if not ignored, is a salient truth. It is the key finding that we, the disciples indeed, did not suffer alone. Heaven suffered right along with us from this onslaught of Gentile wheat destruction, that which has denied us our bread. Consequently, both heaven and earth are now commanded to rejoice. In this finding, I boldly venture forward to point you to Revelation chapter 9 and give you a brief, and I promise, brief excursion of the 5th trumpet. Because we see that it was the locust that emerged from where? From out of the pit. They emerged merely because the star came down from heaven to set them free. Ergo, the Lord calls them his army. Verse 1, and the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke. Well, if you need to know more about that, I refer you to Seven Trumpet Luminescence. It gives you a thorough dossier of the meaning of that term. But for now, we're going to advance to verse 3. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. Revelation chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. Launching forward to Revelation chapter 11 and reading verse 3, then 6 and 7, we can gain a little more insight into the reality that both heaven and earth fell into disappointment during the age of the Gentiles. Verse 3, and I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. That means you're under mourning. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. The God of the earth is Christ. He's the one that created the earth. These 2 witnesses stand before him. These have power to shut heaven that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. Didn't stop us for 2,000 years seeking to sow our wheat in the field. But it was frustrated by the forces of nature. These have power to shut heaven that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. Revelation chapter 11, verses 3 through 7. The audacity, making war against those who set about to make you free. John chapter 5 manifests that the 2 witnesses represent Jesus and Moses. In fact, they are called the 2 witnesses without including Elijah, because the children of Israel, I remind you, demanded of Moses that Christ speak to them ventriloquially through a prophet like unto Moses. And Christ, being ever so honorable of his covenant, agreed to those terms. He promised to send them a prophet like unto Moses. So there was someone else to come, which we know to be Jesus, through whom Christ, the dove, was to rest upon, and likewise speak through him. John chapter 5, verse 46 and 47. For had ye believed Moses, ye would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if you believe not his writings, how shall you believe my words? John chapter 5, verse 46 through 47. A repetition again is needed to express Jesus' commensurate consternation. That's found in Malachi chapter 3, verses 6 and 7. For I am the Lord, I change not. It's Christ speaking. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. Ergo, he tells you that he made a covenant. He's not going to change that either. For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. Even from the days of your fathers, you're gone away from mine ordinances and have not kept them. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, said the Lord of hosts. But ye said, wherein shall we return? The Lord of hosts affirms that they have violated the Lord's ordinances. Those themes expressed through Moses. Ergo, Jesus is on board with their violation of the law. Moses handed to us the law at the behest of Christ. And Jesus, also at the behest of Christ, fulfilled its covenant. He was the promised prophet prophesied by the law to be the ventriloquial voice through whom Christ would speak. They are the Lord's two witnesses, both. Though they had Elijah's miracle power, that which we are commanded to seek is our bread, power to bring the drought, and also the rain needed for the wheat to relieve the drought. Instead, by their great discipline, both suffered the indignity of rejection of the locust army, the very people whom they sought to uplift. Not only did the two witnesses, Moses and Jesus, feel rejected and slighted, likewise was the two olive trees. Israel and Judah, also rejected by Christ's locust army. Thus did the two witnesses prophesy in sackcloth. Can anything be more frustrating than to have a power to validate your ministry and by principle not be allowed to use it? I ask you. Locusts and worms, including palmer, canker, and caterpillars, destroyed our meager production of wheat during the time of a drought, a time when the two witnesses had power to make it rain, but reserved their energy in deference to the need for Gentile growth. Again, let the point resound loudly. Wheat is pure doctrine. Only thusly would Christ promise to restore that which the locust hath taken away. To illustrate, consider the Apostle Paul. He was sent by heaven and not by hell. In this regard, many Christians myopically and with careless renderings extract from his writings the concept of the immortality of the soul. They teach that he, loosely quoting, said, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Even if this is what Paul meant, that a man has a spirit within him that upon his death goes to heaven, the Holy Spirit phrased all of his expressions, and they serve as a cankerworm sent by Christ. Peter agreed when he said in 2 Peter chapter 3, I'm reading verse 15 and then verse 16, the long suffering of our Lord is salvation. Even as our beloved brother Paul also, according to the wisdom given unto him, hath written unto you. Verse 16, as also in all his epistles, speaking in them of these things, in which are some things hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable wrest, as they also do the other scriptures unto their own destruction. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 15 through 16. Of this we can be assured because Paul promised the invalidation of his doctrine today. I'll cite to you a couple examples. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. And I, brethren, could not speak unto you as unto the spiritual, but as unto carnal, even as unto babes in Christ. I have fed you with milk and not with meat, for heretofore ye were not able to bear it, neither yet now are ye able. For ye are yet carnal, and walk as men. Likewise, he admonishes us of the invalidation of his work in Hebrews chapter 5, because he promises that it would be invalidated, doesn't mean it wasn't part of the Lord's strategy for salvation. It created an army of believers that brought frustration upon the righteous. Verse 12, for when for the time ye ought to be teachers, ye have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk, and not of strong meat. Verse 13, for everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness. Don't try to serve up any bread under those circumstances. The Lord needs to destroy it. You're unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. Verse 14, but strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even those who, by reason of use, have their senses exercised to do as Malachi promised we would do, to discern both good and evil. Chapter 6, verse 1. Therefore, leaving the principles of the doctrine of Christ, let us go on to perfection, not laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith towards God, and of the doctrine of baptisms. He's showing you now the doctrines that the Gentiles perverted, those things that they would have to be re-educated about, of the doctrine of baptisms, and of laying on of hands, and of resurrection of the dead, and of eternal judgment. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 12 through 14, chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Along with many other doctrines of Gentile perversion, this doctrine of the immortality of the soul was never taught in the law. Moses never gave instructions to Israel on how to proceed to heaven at their death. Jesus also taught against this theme. Instead, he promised in John chapter 5, verse 28 and 29, the hour is coming, indicating that 2,000 years ago it had not come. The hour is coming in the which all that are in the graves shall hear his voice. Verse 29, and shall come forth, they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation. John chapter 5, verses 28 and 29. Plainly, we shall see that it is only, just as promised, that we shall learn to discern who serves God and who doesn't at the moment of this resurrection. They haven't received a reward for their good deeds by transference to heaven, nor have they been punished for their evil deeds by being cast into the flames of hell. Ergo, both the righteous and the wicked are rewarded at the last day and in the resurrection. To boot, Jesus spoke these words by the directive of the highest, and further said that to reject them is to hate Christ. He said, John chapter 14, verse 24 and 25. Verse 24, he that loveth me not keepeth not my sayings, and the word which ye hear is not mine, but the Father's which sent me. These things have I spoken unto you, being yet present with you. Ergo, he spoke these things not 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, but 2,000 years ago, according to John chapter 14, verse 24 through 25, and other texts that I could cite to you as well. No such caveat was attached to Paul's work. Neither were any of Moses' or Jesus' words promised to be disannulled. Not so with Paul's work. It was ordained for circumcision today. Thusly were his feet, unlike the other 12, never washed by Jesus' hands. Many other Old Testament and even New Testament doctrines, wheat, were also destroyed by the worms. Only this specific example of resurrection can now be cited. But all doctrinal deletions lent frustration to Jesus and Moses. We must therefore ask, how is it that we lost these doctrines requiring the restoration of our wheat? How is it that when a famine was in the land, these past 2,000 years of Gentile Christology, that even our very meager production of spiritual sustenance was taken from us? It was eaten by the Lord's army, the locust ministering Gentiles, the cankerworms, the agents of death. For worms are defined as the facilitators of our death. Isaiah affirms as much. He says, and they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me. For their worms shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 24. But I say, glory of all glory. Just as Jesus promised, for this last day, the righteous of all, whether Hebrew or Gentile, shall be resurrected. Such is now our bread, our empowerment with miracles. And all banished doctrine shall be restored. And this we have the promise that the Lord will, quote, restore to Zion the years that the locust hath eaten, and the caterpillar and the cankerworm, my great army which I sent among you. Close quote. He shall now restore as our bread, which is processed from the full wheat flour. With that, I bring the study to a close.